Now, one of the most powerful features in using dynamic block is minimize the amount of typing we need to do. Now, to change the text label in this dynamic block, all we need to do is just highlight the block. I'm just going to use crossing. You can see that there's a drop-down grip here. If I click on grip, I can select from a list I set up in this dynamic block to change to a different floor joist type. Now, right now it's 11 by 7/8 at 16 inch on center. I can change this to 16 inch TGI S33 to 12 inch on center. If I just click on this option here, the text will automatically change to that settings. So you really don't have to do a lot of typing when you're using dynamic block. Now, another feature of these dynamic block is that we can adjust the arrow head and the length of this span arrow quite easily. Now we just need to highlight the block again, and we can see that there's a stretch grip at the end here. I can just stretch it, the arrow will follow it, and then you can see that the arrow at the opposite end is also being stretched by the same amount. So then the text is always going to be in the center. So if we pull this a little bit tighter, it'll become shorter and the text is still remain in the center. Now, if you want the text to split into different separate line, in dynamic block, I set up the attribute as multi-line attribute, so we can break up these string of text or attribute into a different line if we like. So all I need to do is just double click on the attribute, and then the attribute editor will open up. If I click on this little button here, open multi-line editor, so I'll be editing the attribute directly, just like mtext. So if I want to break the line here at the end of on center and make CW as a separate line, I can also make glue and nail on a separate line. I'm going to select OK, and select OK again, and then I have these line break the way I like it. And I can also actually pick on the grip here to move the text to be a little bit lower, so there'll be one line below the arrow and two lines above the arrow, and I can just go in there and just nudge it a little bit, give it a little bit more space between the arrow line and the text and the attribute. So it's very flexible and very easy to use. Now you can also modify the attribute of this block, multiple block at the same time. So if I want to change these free block at the top here, instead of 12 inch on center to 16 inch on center, all I need to do is just highlight these blocks, and then from the property panel, from the attribute tab, click in here. There should be a little button over here, click in this, and I can change this to 16 inch, and then select OK, and all free block will change to a 16 inch on center. Now when I place this information in my drawing, I usually like to have all these blocks lined up vertically and have the arrow length to be all the same. Now with dynamic block, this is much easier to manage than using mtext and graphically drawn arrow. So if I want all the block to match up with this one in the middle here, I just need to select this block. I'm going to use crossing and select this block, and then highlight the position X, and I'm going to use Ctrl C to copy the value to the clipboard, and then I'm going to select the rest of these blocks and then paste the value back in the position X. Ctrl V and hit enter. Now all the blocks are lined up vertically. Now if I want all the arrow to be the same length to match this one here in the middle, I just highlight this block again and then copy the symbol half length, Ctrl C to copy the value to the clipboard, and then again highlight the rest of the block and then paste the value in the field again and hit enter. Now all of them have the same arrow length. So with dynamic block, managing this information is much easier than using mtext and a graphically drawn arrow. Now we're going to go over the procedure on how to create these dynamic block step by step from scratch. So I'm going to go to the icon up here, and then start a new drawing. And I'm going to choose the AutoCAD DWT template, select open. And I'm going to check the unit setting, so I'm going to type units from my keyboard. And I want the units to be in inches, architectural, so precision is 1/16 of an inch is fine. Decimal degree, so we have the unit set up correctly. And the next thing, I'm just going to turn off the grid in the background, hitting F7 from my keyboard. So we're ready to start creating the geometry and attribute for the dynamic block. Now I'm just going to draw a line using the line command from my keyboard L, or you can go up here to hit the line command. And then I'm just going to pick a point and have F8 to make sure it's horizontal, ortho on. And I'm just going to enter, this is going to be 1.5 inch, 1.5 inch line to start. And then I'm going to move the line, middle of the line, back to the origin. So this is the origin point, so I'm just going to pick up highlight the line, pick on the grip, and move it to 0, 0 to the origin. Now what I'm going to do, I'm going to offset a line above this line here. So I'm going to go to the offset command. And I want the offset distance to be 1/8 of an inch. And I'm going to draw another line from this end point up. And I'm going to offset this again 1/8 of an inch. And draw a line from here to this intersection to create this 45-degree arrow. I'm going to offset another line at 1/32 of an inch. And extend this to here, and then we're going to trim this and just going to trim this out and erase these two lines. And I'm going to mirror, actually before I mirror, I'm going to do a hatch, and using solid I'm going to pick internal points, so I have a solid hatch in here for the arrow. I'm going to hit escape a couple of times to cancel the command. I'm going to mirror these arrowhead from the midpoint over here, and I'm going to mirror it again to go below this line. Pick this point, drag it over here, and then select yes to delete the old object. So now I have the graphic for the joist span arrow. Now next thing we're going to do, we're going to turn these graphic entity we have on the screen here into a block. So you're going to go to the block command, type B from the keyboard, and we're going to call this dynamic joist label. Now we're going to pick a point for the, well actually we don't need to, 0, 0 is right here. This is our origin for the block, and we're going to select objects. We can give it a description, so we're going to say this is dynamic joist label with attributes. So we can select OK, and then make sure your toggle is on for opening block editor, and we're going to select OK. And we want this to be annotative, and we want to just convert the block. Okay, we'll select OK. So we're in the block editor now. Now once you're in the block editor, make sure that you have the block offering palette open. So there's a toggle up here in the ribbon panel. You can click on this to turn these palette on and off. So make sure you have these palette on so you can access the parameters and actions for block editing. Now the next thing I'm going to do, I'm going to add a parameter to control the length of these span arrows. So I'm going to go to click on parameters and select linear, and I'm just going to pick the point in the middle here, and then pick the point at the end of this arrow here, and drag these parameters down here, And now you can see there's 2 arrow head at each end of these extension line. Now I'm just going to highlight these parameters and change that to at the bottom here under the miscellaneous category. Rather than 2 grip, I'm just going to change it to 1 grip so that it will only have a grip at this end here, because I want to stretch the arrow in this direction at this end here, not from here. Now I'm going to rename this distance to something that's more meaningful. Property label in here. Now the distance, rather than call it just distance 1, I'm just going to call it arrow half length. Because it's not a full length of the arrow, this is only half length of the arrow, so this is the label I want to use, so it's a little bit more understandable. And description, we can probably just use the same thing. And maybe put a colon at the end here. Now we want to add action to these parameters. So from the action tab here in the block offering palette, I'm going to select the stretch action, and I'm going to pick on these parameters, half arrow, half length, and I'm going to pick the point for where I want to do stretch. And then you ask me to create rectangle for the stretch command, and I'm just going to create rectangle from this point to this point here. And then you ask me to select object I want to stretch. I'm going to use the crossing, and I'm just going to select these things here and then hit enter. Once I finish selecting all the things I want to stretch, I'm going to hit enter to finish. Now it's always good to test to make sure that all your dynamic feature in your block is working properly before you add another feature, because once you have all the feature added, it's very hard to debug sometimes. So I'm going to go in here up at the test block in the ribbon panel here to test the block. So I can click in here and I can just see the stretch arrow grip. I can stretch this to any length I want. Now I'm going to click on close test block so I know these parameters working. The other thing I want to do is I want to limit the minimum length, because you don't want to go back beyond it. It's going to create an error. So the minimum length right now, this is at 3/4 inch. So the value type is none. Distance minimum is 0, so we want to be maybe 1/2 inch. So that's minimum, and you cannot stretch less than this point. You can add a maximum if you like, but may not be necessary. So but if you want to be safe, you can add a maximum to be, say, you don't want it to be more than 6 inches, so we're going to add to 3 inches here, so that'll be maximum. So it's not likely that this symbol will be 6 inches long. Now we got the stretch to go in one direction. We want to have another stretch to stretch this in the opposite direction using the same grip. So we're going to click on the stretch action again, and we're going to pick on this parameters, and we're going to pick on the same point to start a stretch action. Now I'm going to pick a rectangle for the stretch command. I'm going to pick a point here and here, and I'm going to select these elements using crossing for the stretch command. So once I finish selecting the element I want to stretch, I'm going to hit enter, and you'll see that there's another stretch action in here. Now in this one, we need to do a little bit more modification to this action. So we can click in here, and you can see that there's override, distance, multiplier, angle, offset. So we want it to be the same distance, and angle offset we want it to be 180 degrees. So we want to go in the opposite direction. Now you can actually play with these distance multipliers so that you can actually have it go further than what you want or less by using this multiplier. So if you want to go more than what you pull in here in this direction, you make the number bigger than 1. If you want to go less than the amount of stretch you pull in this direction, you make it less than 1. So, but we want to be the same, so we're going to leave that distance multiplier to be 1. Now let's test this out. So go to test block, and we're going to click on the block and see if we can stretch it. It seems to be working. Now if we go beyond, so we cannot only go any smaller than this amount. So because there's a minimum value here on the stretch parameter, so this is the minimum we can go. So that's good. So we established these commands to make the arrow head to go as far as we want, maybe maximum 6 inches. It's not likely we're going to need that. So we can start thinking about adding the attribute into this block. Now we're going to define the attribute for these dynamic blocks. So we're going to click on the attribute definition command here on the ribbon panel. And then we're going to call the tag, we're going to enter the tag value to be joist type. So we're going to keep the cap on, underscore type, and then in the prompt we're just going to use the joist type. Now justification, we want it to be at the bottom center, and text style standard is fine. Make sure you don't turn on annotative, because we want the block to be annotative. If you have both the block being annotative and the text being annotative, it's going to multiply the text height to be too big when you insert the block. So make sure you don't toggle this on. Text height we want to be 1/8, rotation 0. That should be fine. Now we want to enter a default value. So the default value is going to be 11 7/8 of an inch TJI. S31 at 16 inch on center. Complete width 3/4 inch OSB, glued it and nailed it. Okay, and after you enter the default value, then you can actually click on multiline, and you can actually click in here to see how you want the line break as well. So now you can actually set the line break default setting. So I want the line break to be after the 16 inch on center, and then glue and nail. Like that. And make sure the margin is wide enough to accommodate all these lines. Select OK. OK. Now we may want the default length of the arrow to be a little bit longer, so we're just going to use the stretch command and stretch this out another maybe 1/4 of an inch. And in this direction too. Okay, so let's test the block again. So there we go. So let's see if we can actually change the line break. So if we don't want to break it in here, we can just delete and make sure that the margin is wide enough. Select OK. OK, and we can click on the arrow to make it longer to accommodate these line break. Now we're going to add a parameter so that we can actually move the attribute location if we wanted to. So from the parameter tab, we're going to select point, and we're just going to pick a point somewhere out here, so maybe just a little bit above the, maybe in the middle of the text here. And then we're going to hit escape a couple of times to finish this. And then from the action, we're going to select move. And then we're going to pick on these point parameters. And then we're going to select object we want to move with these parameters. So I'm just going to select the attribute and hit enter to finish. And now we can move the attribute with these point parameters. So let's test it out. So from the test block, so again, we can make the arrow a little bit wider and double click on the attribute to remove the line break. So I'm going to put my cursor in here, go backspace, and make sure this is long enough to accommodate the margin is wide enough to accommodate the line. Select OK, and then select OK. Now if I highlight the block, I should be able to see a grip in here, so I can actually pick on this grip and move this down. So the parameter is working. We're going to select close test block and go back to the block editor. Now the next thing we're going to do, we're going to use a block property table to enter all the attribute value that we want based on different type of joist structure. So what we want to do is go on to from the action tab here, we're going to click on block property table, and we're just going to pick a point down here somewhere for the grip. We're going to click that point, and then we want to set a default to be 1 grip. Enter. Now we're going to select the icon on the upper left corner here with the plus sign, and we're going to pick on the joist type attribute as our property. Select OK. Now we can actually enter all the different joist type we want to enter into the table here that we can use for the attribute. So we're going to type in 11 7/8 of an inch, TJI S31 at 16 inch on center, complete width 3/4 inch OSB, glued and nail. Now I'm just going to copy this to create the next row. Control C from my keyboard, and then Control V, paste it. I'm going to change the 16 to be 12 inch on center. Now you can actually, using this method, to populate the whole table that you want. So I'm just going to fill in the rest, and I'll show you what it looks like when it's done. Now if I entered all the different value for these joist labels, so I have 11 7/8 inch to 14 inch, 16 inches, 18 inches, and 20 inches. Also enter another category of joist type. These are just basically dimensional lumber, 2x8, 2x10, and 2x12. But I probably want to differentiate this graphically between the TJI and the dimensional lumber. So I'm going to add another parameter to do that graphically. So what I'm going to do to distinguish the difference between using the TJI joist and the dimensional lumber, I'm going to turn off these fill hatch here in the arrow so that when you set it to be the dimensional lumber, it will not be filled with arrowhead. So then we can distinguish graphically just by the glance to tell whether it is going to be for TJI or dimensional lumber. So I'm going to set up another visibility parameter to control these items here. So I'm going to go to parameter and select visibility. I'm just going to click somewhere down here further, and this is going to be the visibility graphic, and I'm just going to rechange it to be joist category. Actually, it's going to be controlled by the block property table. So I'm going to highlight this joist category, and number of grip is going to be 0, so that you won't even see it. Now, to set up the visibility states, I'm going to set up 2 states. I'm going to rename this. This is going to be TJI, and then a new state is going to be dimensional lumber. Select OK. Now, when I use dimensional lumber, I want to turn off these hatch fill here. So I click on this and the hatch in here, and then they turn off. Now if I change the state back to TJI, the fill will come back on. Now I'm going to go back to the block property table, and I'm going to add another parameter in here. So joist category. So in here, Joist category, we're going to use these are going to be TJI. We're going to turn on block property must match in a row in the table. We select OK. Now we're going to test this out in the test block item here. So if we click on a test block in the ribbon panel, we're going to see if it's working properly. So we're going to click on the arrow to make it a little bit longer. And then we want to double click on the attribute and change the line break setting. So go back and make the margin wide enough so we fit on 2 lines. Select OK and then OK, and then we're going to pull the text down further so that is the line, the arrow line is between the 2 strings of text. And then we're going to click on the drop down to select 2x10, and you can see that the field on the arrowhead is hidden in this setting. So this is the way we want it. So it is working the way we want it. We can add another graphic distinction between the dimensional number and the TJI joist settings. Now I'm going to close the block editor and test it in this drawing and see how it works. So close block editor, save the change. And now let's go to the block and place this in here. 1 to 1, maybe 1 to 1/4 inch. Now I'm going to pick a point to place the block, set the angle rotation, and then select OK. Now it looks like the blocks are quite big, so I'm just going to do a zoom extend here. So move this out of the way. I'm just going to delete this old one. And let's see if it works. So if we stretch this and move this down and change the setting and change the line break. Now we're going to pick on a drop down group and select dimensional number setting. And it seems to be working quite well. So the other thing, one last thing we need to do is to add the annotative scale. So in here, we highlight the block and annotative. And the annotative scale, we're going to go in here and add a whole bunch of annotative scale to this block. So we're going to click on this because it's imperial block. We're going to add the 1/8, 3/16, 3/8, ½ inch, 3/4, 1 inch, 3/32, 1/36. We are not likely going to be thinking about the joist spacing when we're looking at 1 to 32nd of an inch. Even 1½ inch, 3 inch, maybe. So I think that should cover it, but you can always add these scale if you want. Select OK. Select OK. Now to check if this is working, right now our annotative scale is 1/4 inch. So if we say it's 1/8, so it become bigger. So if we change it back to 1/2, then it should be a lot smaller. So it is behaving the way we anticipated with annotative scaling, and the text is working out at the right size. Now we're going to extract this block into a separate drawing file so that we can insert this block into other drawings. So what we can do, we can use a W block command. So we're going to use a W, we're going to type W from the keyboard. And then we're going to use the source, we're going to select block, and we're going to use a drop down. And there's only one block in this drawing. So we select that, and we're going to click here, the little button here to find a folder. and make sure that you set the insert unit to be inches. We can click in here, and then we're just going to use a default block name as a file name. We can select save, and then select OK, and you'll write this out as a new file with the block name. Now I'm going to start a new drawing file and test inserting that block we just created. So I'm going to go to new file, and then we're going to select AutoCAD DWT as a template. Select open. We create a new file now, and now we want to insert that block we write out from another drawing. So we're going to click on the block tablet here, and then click on this little icon here. Just click, and then we're going to paste the path of where we write that block to. So I'm just going to Control V, paste the path in there, and this is the block that we just created or written out to a new file. I'm going to select open, and this is the block. So we can use F8 to make sure it is orthogonally aligned, or we can do one that's vertical like this. Select OK. And then we're going to hit escape, and then let's see if we change the annotative scale 1/4 inch, and it's become a lot bigger and overlapping each other too. So I'm just going to move this one over here, and now we can just try testing to see if we can manipulate a feature like we did before, and move this down a little bit, and then double click on this attribute. And we want to redo the line break using backspace, put it back on the same line, make the margin a little wider, select OK. OK. Now if we change it to dimensional number, see if the graphic will update, and the graphic did update. The fill in the arrowhead is turned off, so this is how it's supposed to behave. So this is working properly. Now if we want to insert another one, if we go to the block tab here and then click in here, and then we can just place another one. Now because these entity inside the block were on layer 0, so it should take on the color and line type setting of the layer definition. So let's test this out, make sure that it's working properly. So I'm just going to go to the layer manager. I'm going to create a new layer. And we're going to call these S Joist label. And I want to change the color to be yellow, color number 2, okay. And then we want to change the line type, and we want to load some line type, so we want to look for maybe dash dot. Select OK, and then select OK. So it's going to have a dash dot line type in here. Now if we change the block to that layer, and also this one to that layer, you can see the line type is working properly, and the color of the text and the line is pick on the layer color. So that's the way we want it to work, and we confirm that everything is working properly. And so that's how we create a dynamic block for floor joist label.